Thank you, Madam Chair. This is essentially very similar to a bill that we heard last year, and then we heard another portion of a bill earlier that dealt with whistleblower protections, probably one of the most fundamentally critical protections that we can offer if we're talking about changing the culture of law enforcement. There is the FOP offered very similar amendments, or the same amendments to me for this bill as they offered for the other bill that we heard earlier. There are even additional amendments that have been proposed by my panel of experts that you'll hear from, and you'll hear why. But I think one of the most critical issues that has been addressed by the amendments and that you'll hear about is the idea that not just for an officer to be free to report instances of misconduct without retaliation, but also to be free to report even when those orders come from a superior officer or someone, a command staff of the institution. And so with that, I'm going to defer to the panel, I guess from right to left. Okay.
Good evening now, and thanks for having me back. Again, my name is Neil Franklin, so I appreciate the opportunity to address the committee on House Bill 221, whistleblower protection and law enforcement. You know, again, I've got 34 years in law enforcement, and I'm going to speak to one particular time in my law enforcement career when I was the head of training for the Baltimore City Police Department. And the men and women would graduate from that academy and go out into the field and work in the community. And on more than one occasion, as these police officers would come back to the academy to have conversations with me because I had an open door policy, they would tell me about the stories and challenges that they have out in working patrol and how difficult it is because we needed to know of these challenges so that we can adjust training accordingly. But many times it wasn't so much, the conversation wasn't so much about the training needs and the adjustments that needed to be made. They would talk about the difficulty in witnessing some unfavorable and in some cases illegal action by police officers, senior police officers, while they were out in patrol. And they wouldn't speak specifically to me about, because they knew what would happen. They knew that I would have a responsibility to then go forward with the information they would give me, but they wouldn't speak specifically about the problems, the things that they were seeing for the fear of being retaliated against. And, you know, taking that moment in time and coming forward here and just going back a couple years and looking at what happened to a detective by the name of Joseph Crystal in the Baltimore Police Department, when he came forward to report some criminal activity by a couple police officers, one being a supervisor within the police department. And from that moment on, he had received and become a part of all kinds of problems. Not just receiving, how can I say it, having supervision look at him with a very, very keen eye, questioning everything that he did from that point forward and trying to make his job more difficult, but receiving no protection from the department and management within the department when he finds a dead rat on his vehicle. And I think many of you know about this because it was in the Baltimore Sun, it was in the media, it was publicized, to the point, and receiving no protection even from the commissioner's office. And I've had many conversations with Joe Crystal, and to the point where he felt that he had to leave the department for his safety and the safety of his family, and having no process in place, you know, to push back and to get protection and so on. So I just wanted to mention that. This bill, HB 221, provides a clear direction for those who come forward. And if we want our police officers to report the wrongdoings of the few that we say are out there, the problem apples, the few apples, then we have to provide a mechanism for them to report and to feel safe and to actually be safe and protected in doing so. And that's what this piece of legislation does. So I ask
thank you. My name is Ken Williams. I'm from Massachusetts. I came here today to testify in support of House Bill 221. I want to start off with the fact that freedom of speech in the United States is protected by the First Amendment, but that right has not been equal to all. Without the First Amendment, protesters could not have assembled and voted or voiced their clarion call for an end to segregation laws. Without the First Amendment, the press would not have been able to report as freely on civil rights abuses. Dr. Martin Luther King himself exercised his First Amendment freedoms at great peril. He faced arrest numerous times for his willingness to challenge local officials and galvanize people for social change. For many years, citizens who support this fine institution have complained they were victimized by police brutality, racially profiled, and had their civil rights violated. Their voices were loud within their own neighborhoods, but they were marginalized and shut out from enacting political change themselves. They're here today. They're in back of me. They've been in this institution all day long. Justice Sotomayor in 2014 in the decision in Lane versus Frank stated that almost 50 years ago, this court declared that citizens do not surrender their First Amendment rights by accepting public employment. Rather, the First Amendment protection of a public employee's speech depends on a careful balance between the interests of the employee as a citizen in commenting upon matters of public concern and the interests of the state as an employer in promoting the efficiency of the public services it performs through its employees. The point of what I'm trying to make here is whistleblower cops are not ever elevated in these police agencies. Joe Crystal is now the former Baltimore Police Department detective, despite the fact that he used his speech to put two criminals who were in police uniforms in jail. There are a number of other citizens who became police officers in this state who exercised their freedom of speech to talk about waste, fraud, abuse, corruption, and they are former law enforcement officers. It's very important that everybody realize that the job of policing shouldn't come at peril simply because you arrest crime within the ranks and file of a police agency. But that is the sad reality. I came here today to support House Bill 221 because it's a fresh start to afford all types of notice of the nasty things that may result if a police officer chooses to go and take the courageous step of doing the right thing and actually being a good cop, a good citizen on patrol, and arresting crime within his or her police agency. Thank you for having me today.
Hi, my name is Tawanda Jones, and I'm totally in support of this Bill 221, just for the simple fact that this will bring so much transparency and accountability that the communities are begging for. We need whistleblowers. My brother was brutally murdered, and we're seeing this happen all over again. In Freddie Gray case, just different things. And you're talking about good officers that put their life on the line, their integrity on the line, to chip at that solid blue wall, to come forward and to step up to do what's right. And who is protecting them? And then the sad part, they want us to tell everything. You see something, say something. It should go all around the board. And I'm totally in support, because at the end of the day, if you got a good cop, and that's what make you good, for saying what you see. But if you're so intimidated that you may lose your life just by doing the right thing, why should they have to feel like they got to lose their life by doing something right? And being as though I'm a teacher, that's just like me saying somebody getting child abuse, and I sit up there and say, oh, well, I'm not going to tell on this teacher. My hands, that blood is on my hands, that abuse is on my hands. And right now, the blood is on all the hands for the ones that don't say nothing. And it truly be on y'all hands if y'all don't lift this bill up. We need this bill. This is something that's totally needed. We're talking about good and bad now. And we're talking about this is something that we really need, so I'm totally in support. And I'm just urging y'all, please, to pass this. Thank you.
I guess we're in evening now. Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity. I just wanted to express my support for this bill. I happen to also be a retired U.S. Marshal. I happen to also be a whistleblower. I spent 15 years facilitating the Federal Witness Protection Program. And it came a point where, after 15 years of providing protection, it came a point I needed protection. And when you get to that point, there is no protection. Because the perception is, again, you're blowing the whistle against the blue wall of silence. As Matthew Fogg said, by the way, Matthew was my former supervisor. I was with him on that stakeout in Baltimore. We took down America's Most Wanted, top 15 fugitive. While we're in Baltimore, our colleagues are at our headquarters trying to figure out ways how they can derail our efforts. At some point, we had to put the brakes on all of this, and we blew the whistle. I am a former class agent, class rep, a $300 million lawsuit against the Department of Justice. I can tell you, in a nutshell, that cost me my career. Not only did it cost me my career, it cost me parts of my livelihood, because people have no idea what happens when you blow the whistle. They have no idea what the term retaliation means. Retaliation sounds like a crime, but really, I'm not sure it's a crime. Retaliation is standard practice when you have to defuse a strong case. And the retaliation that I face, I won't get into it, but it's certainly one that will be written in a book. And hopefully someday, it's one that's in the movie industry. Simply because my role and my blessing and my calling from God is to send a message to people. So what happened to me, what happened to Matthew Fogg, what happened to anyone who decides that they're just going to do what's right. Anyone who decides to put their life on the line, which we do, just to do what's right. With that being said, I'm in full support of this bill. Thank you for your time.
What's your name at the beginning?
David Grogan, last name Grogan.
Before you makes two very simple but very impactful changes to the law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights. As members of the committee, you'll recall I submitted and testified in favor of similar legislation last year. Well before April's unrest, I could see this issue simmering in my community, as it has been in communities around our country. There are certainly a number of reforms that were necessary, and changes to law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights were among them. First, the bill provides if an officer is criminally convicted of a serious misdemeanor, then the officer is not entitled to an administrative hearing. A serious misdemeanor means a misdemeanor crime that carries a potential for more than 1 year of imprisonment. Under current law, an officer only loses his right to his or her right to a hearing upon conviction of a felony. However, there are many serious misdemeanor crimes in Maryland, such as second-degree assault, perjury, possessing or administering CDS, just to name a few. When an officer is not only charged but convicted of such a serious crime, the officer should not be entitled to an administrative hearing before the commissioner or their chief. The chief or the commissioner should be able to take immediate disciplinary action. Allowing an officer to have an administrative hearing after a serious criminal conviction only serves to delay appropriate action, which in many cases would be a termination from the agency. Second, the bill allows the commissioner to suspend a police officer without pay when an officer is charged with a serious misdemeanor. Again, these are serious crimes, and currently the chiefs and our police commissioner can only suspend without pay if an officer is charged with a felony. A very high-profile example occurred in Baltimore in 2014. A Baltimore City police officer was caught on the city's CCTV system repeatedly punching a man near a Baltimore City bus stop. Many of you will recall the video from the incident, which went viral and sparked outrage throughout the city and indeed parts of the country. Not only did the officer repeatedly assault the man, but he lied about the incident report, saying that the man attacked him first. This clearly was proven false, according to the video. As a result, the officer was charged with second-degree assault and perjury. While serious crimes, they're both misdemeanors. And because these crimes are misdemeanors, the commissioner was unable to suspend that officer without pay, even with all of the video evidence that we had. Because of the law, the current law, the commissioner was unable to do that. The public is right to be outraged that the city has to continue to pay a police officer that not only brutally assaulted someone, but then lied about it. In our quest to rebuild trust between the community and our police officers, it is imperative that we work to have flexibility to administer appropriate and swift discipline when police officers betray their badge and harm the citizens that they are sworn to protect. House Bill 619 goes a long way to improving that flexibility and gives the commissioner and the chief the option, and I will say that again, the option to suspend without pay in the most egregious cases. It is for these reasons that I strongly urge a favorable report.
My name is Dr. Sofia Marjanovic. I am a PhD in immunology and microbiology. I'm a member of the Fort Peck Ocheti Shakowin, or the Sioux tribe. I'm also a practitioner of Orthodox Judaism. Back in 2012 to 2014, I went through a divorce with a domestic abuser. During the process of this divorce from a domestic abuser, I encountered a county sheriff who concerned me about his neglect of duty and misconduct. And mind you, police officers are domestic abusers at the highest rates in this country. I made a complaint of misconduct with the sheriff's department. The department did not advise me about whether they would be investigating the case and never advised me if there was an outcome of an investigation. I was later ordered to work with the same sheriff against whom I have filed a complaint. I have had problems working with this particular sheriff, and I'm concerned about the problems. I'm concerned about that the problems are due to retaliation. I'm concerned about retaliation because the sheriff shouted at me that he did not want me filing another complaint against him. This problematic behavior of the sheriff concerns me, and I'm concerned for bias by the sheriff against me. I feel concerned about being alone around the sheriff, and so I have started video recording the interactions with him, which is my legal right to do so according to federal as well as state law in public places. As of 2 weeks ago, the sheriff claims he fears for his life around me and fears for the life of his officers in his department around me. If you're following what's happening around the country with regard to the video recordings that are going on, police officers are often getting off on charges by claiming they feared for their life around someone.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ray Kelly. I'm a community organizer with the No Boundaries Coalition, a member of the Pastoral Council at St. Peter Claver Church, and a lifetime resident of Sandtown in West Baltimore. In my 4 decades in the community, I've seen and experienced a culture of aggressive and disrespectful policing my whole life. The officer-friendly we were introduced as children is only a memory for those who were born in the 1900s. There's a major difference in how we encounter the police and how they encounter us. Decades of abuse and oppressive tactics has instilled a fear of consequence, and we must carefully scrutinize every action we make, as this could prove to be detrimental or even fatal. While the established protections for officers creates a situation where they can do whatever, whenever, and wherever they want without any fear of consequence. In Baltimore City, the Civilian Review Board has not influenced one decision in its 15 years of existence. And truthfully, it's only a toothless tiger. The Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights ensures that the officers will have every advantage in this and every proceeding geared toward discipline and accountability, while the people who have suffered this oppression for generations have to jump through hoops of fire to even file a complaint. And what is the added insult to years of injury is even if an officer is found guilty or innocent, we, the very taxpayers that have been abused, foot the bills, and we ensure that they have the best representation money can buy. The coalition and our partners stand in support of efforts to reform and seeing it necessary if there is to be a progression to change in the police culture. Trust is earned, and right now it is the police that have to earn it. Accountability and transparency from this point is a must, and the structure as it stands blocks the efforts to even begin achieving it. We can never feel like there will be any actual change as long as the police department can act with impunity in our black and brown communities. There's a document with the essence of its structure allows the police the right to take hours in a process and network completely geared to protect officers in the departments. It would be irrational for any municipality to think that we who have been through so much at the hands of the police department would trust any initiative that isn't directly policy or systemic change, which in a perfect world for us would be to dismantle the present LEOBR and the Baltimore City Civilian Review Board and reestablish it. And we won't be satisfied by another mediation process crafted to keep citizens from formalizing the process and doesn't change the policy or the charter, nor initiate accountability. We demand that the structure be put in place that starts the true growth of accountability within the departments. And that includes facing disciplinary processes, that includes representation of those who are afflicted and not just their brothers in arms. We all know that the police are incapable and unwilling to police themselves or punish their own. And this has to change for there to ever be better community and police relations. We are in a state of emergency, and it has to start now.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I want to thank the Police Working Committee for Reform Work Group for working so hard on this. My name is Lee Maddox. I'm a retired captain with the Maryland State Police. I'm a practicing attorney in Baltimore City. I'm a member of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, and I'm a Harford County resident. I think that measures like this are extremely important, and I appreciate the committee taking time to hear all points of view. I do think reform is necessary in certain areas, and I urge you to reform with great caution so that we do not have unintended consequences 10 years from now that we didn't think through with thoughtful reform measures. One thing, and I'm not going to take all of my time here, but one thing I would stress to you, please do not send the police more unfunded mandates. There are reasons why civilian review boards and different reforms over the years have failed, including community policing, and that is largely tied to funding streams. So if you decide to push something forward, put your money where put your money where it needs to go, and make sure that you don't set us up for yet another failed system reform.
My name is Garland Nixon, and I am a retired law enforcement officer, retired major with the Maryland Natural Resources Police. I'm also a member of the coalition, and particularly I'd like to address the major amendment that needs to be made, the one that the coalition sees as, for lack of a better way to put it, a deal breaker. And that is that in this legislation, there is a change in the LEOBR, considerably for the worse. And here's basically what happens. Currently, when an officer is accused of brutality, they would be investigated. If they're found guilty, there's a trial board, and there would be a 3-member trial board, which the agency would select. The chief of police would select the 3 people. This changes that considerably for the worse. Here's what would happen under the new legislation. The agency, the chief of police, would choose one of the 3. The accused officer would choose the second, and the agency, and basically the accused officer would have veto power on the third. They would have equal input on choosing a third, which means two things. Number one, since there are no restrictions, and as a law enforcement officer, I can remember a family that had 5 brothers on 5 different departments. And an officer accused of brutality under this legislation could literally select his brother to be on the trial board, could literally select a family member to be on the trial board. They could choose anyone they wanted from another department within a pool of officers. Number one. So for brutality, as a result of this, you're pretty much guaranteed 1 not guilty out of 3. Secondly, the accused officer, would have equal input with the agency on the third. However, there is no resolution in the provision if the officer does not agree. So if I'm an officer and I'm accused of brutality, I select someone that I know is going to vote not guilty for 1, and I simply refuse to agree on the third, and there's no resolution. What happens then? Currently, the chief of police selects all 3, which seems like a reasonable process to everyone involved, and we are devolving this into a process where it will be nearly impossible. I think it would be an embarrassment for Maryland to change the process for brutality. And if this was a reasonable process, why wouldn't we change it for all trial boards? Why only brutality? What we see in this legislation are particular things that you have to go through, hurdles you have to go through for brutality that you don't have to go through for any other complaint. The time limit, as a matter of fact. So why, in the state of Maryland, are we making it more difficult to find an officer guilty of brutality than if an officer comes to work and their gun's not properly polished, their shoes aren't shined, or their uniform's not pressed? That doesn't make sense to me, and I think we should oppose that.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for having me here. My name is Neil Franklin. I think I'm not a stranger to many of you here. I'm a retired major from the Maryland State Police, 34 years in law enforcement. I was a head of training on the latter part of my career with the Maryland State Police. I then spent 4 years with Baltimore City as the head of training there. Understand the importance of this type of legislation and bringing community and the policing community together. This is extremely important. The work that I do is for the law enforcement profession. It is to better that profession. It is to bring that profession to a place closer to community, to where they should be. We serve the community. That is our job. We are responsible to and we answer to the community. I'm somewhat disappointed. I love my law enforcement brothers and sisters, and it's obvious that they feel that they're under some sort of attack. And I get that. But they need to see what I see, what the working group sees, and what these community members sitting behind us see. That things are not working the way they should within our communities. It appears that after decades of the community crying out, and don't get me wrong, I'm not speaking about all of law enforcement. There are some very conscientious law enforcement officers and leaders out there who earnestly try to do the right things. But unfortunately, there's a large part of our law enforcement community that's just not getting it yet. And after decades of the community crying out to their police leaders and receiving no adequate resolutions to their concerns, the people are now demanding reform through you. They're elected representatives. And unfortunately, it had to get to this place. If my law enforcement brothers and sisters had been consistently and earnestly reaching out and not pandering to the community and really trying to do what's needed within many of our communities, like Baltimore City, where I grew up, and working hard toward that compromise and resolving problems, the community would not be here today. They'd be back in Baltimore. They'd be back in our other communities, working with the police on a consistent basis to continue the needed reforms. It's always a work in progress. We never, ever, as I told my recruits in both academies, we never, ever get to that place where we say we have arrived and no more changes need to be made. It's always a work in progress. So as mentioned, this is about best practices and transparency. You know, how can any sincere law enforcement leader not see that? So I know that there will be amendments probably offered and so on, but just please think very hard and earnestly about this legislation. It is extremely important. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Hi, my name is Matthew Fogg. I'm a retired Chief Deputy United States Marshal. I've worked with law enforcement organizations all across America and even overseas. I've had a chance to understand law enforcement, but something always stands out to me. I remember when I came in the academy in 1978, had all of this federal law enforcement training. I remember all of the training, everything we went through. And then when I got to my district, I'll never forget this. When I arrived at my duty station, first thing my supervisor told me, he said, Fogg, I know you learned a lot of stuff at the academy, all the academia and everything. He says, but listen, this is how we do it here. And when he said that, he was letting me know there is a culture here in place, and we do things a certain way. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're saying here in law enforcement, certainly we love our brothers and sisters, and it's very important work what we do as heroes in America. But all I tell people, and they say, look, it's just a few bad apples. It's not that many. But I tell people, it only takes a few bad apples to taint the whole lot, and we all understand that. So a lot of times we'll come up with bills and we try to figure out, okay, well, how can we adjust this thing? And that's what you're here to do now, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. What adjustments can we make? But I always say, for me, in my career, when I had to challenge race discrimination, that was the biggest thing. I always said, if we did everything equally, it would fix itself. It's just like the war on drugs. If we went after everybody equally, it would fix itself. But if you start to target certain neighborhoods and certain areas, that's where you get the problem. So we can come up with legislation after legislation. But if we, the working folks, the law enforcement people, we take that legislation and then we decide to couch it in the way it best directs us, that this is how we do it, then we turn right around and get the disparate impact that we see that is constantly going on in America, that our black communities are saying, why are we being treated differently? And that's what we're here today. We need oversight on top of oversight. I say it over again. Oversight on top of oversight, because when he said that to me, he was letting me know there is a culture in place. So when I decided to go against that culture, me and a few others, and we went up on Capitol Hill and we testified, then I watched how that culture immediately turned on us. So what we're saying here is, yes, there are a lot of law enforcement officers. We know who the bad apples are. It's not everybody, I got you. But if I sit back and watch a bad apple do something bad, and I don't say anything about it, what does that make me? That makes me complicit, am I right or wrong? And that's what we're saying here, ladies. We're saying we've got to get protections, and we got to be able to understand, and you need to understand that this is something that if we got the proper oversight, then whatever legislation you do come up with, we'll make certain that it works and it does what it's supposed to do, equally involving everyone. Thank you very much.
First up, I just want to say that we have a panel of mothers here, and in the interest of time, we're going to have one mother speak. However, I would ask that if we are under our 3 minutes, that time be allotted to her, please. And first up, I'd like to say that I'm here. My name is Marion Gray Hopkins, and I am here as the voice of my son, Gary Hopkins, Jr., who was murdered by Prince George's County Police Department, November 27th, 1999. And I am a longtime resident of the state of Maryland, and I am in Chair Valerio's district. So wanted to make sure Mr. Valerio knows that. But we're going to take the opportunity to, again, just announce who we are, and we're going to allow Greta Willis, mother of a victim as well, do the speaking so that it is not redundant. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity to speak on the House Bill 1016. I am a mother and a humble servant and a minister in Baltimore City. I'm a lifetime resident of Baltimore City and a registered voter. Requesting to eliminate 10 days to 5-day window is unacceptable. That unprofessional officers' use to manufacture their story is very personal to me. We want it removed. As my son, Kevin L. Cooper, age 14, a brother, a son, an uncle, a friend, and an aspiring football player, life was stolen in front of me. After I witnessed my son's death, I was required to give a written statement the same day. I feel that law enforcement officers should be held to the same standard. With the recent killings of unarmed victims, there is a greater focus across the nation on the issue of police brutality. There are many demonstrations, rallies, marches, because mothers are tired of losing their sons and daughters at the hands of the police, who are protected by laws that don't protect us. America is tired. We know that there is camaraderie and a blue wall of silence among the officers. The senseless killings of our loved ones at the hands of police is happening in an epidemic proportion. We have lost confidence and trust in our law enforcement. Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights was enacted in 1974, and it has been in need of reform for many years. It is clearly written to protect the officer and not the people that they are hired to protect and to serve. The Law Enforcement Bill of Officer Rights gives officers the right to be the judge, the jury, and the executioner while being protected from judicial prosecution. Our children may be gone, but we are here today as their voice. We are here today as their face, unified, not only in the state of Maryland, but also across this country and across this nation. We are support for one another. We are the mothers that stand together for our children. Under this bill 1016, only if you have the amendments that we will be in favor. If you do not put in the amendments, we are opposing it. Bring justice for families of police accountability and transparency is much needed in the state of Maryland. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Darlene Kane. I, too, am a mother from Baltimore City. I'm a resident of 55 years. My son, Dale Graham, also life was stolen by an officer in Baltimore City. And I'd like to say today as well, I am with Greta Willis and Marion Gray Hopkins, and we stand together on this. And we no longer want to see any more stolen lives. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tawanda Jones. I am my brother's keeper. I'm the sister of Tyrone West. And coming here for now, over going on 3 years since the brutal beating death of my brother. My brother wasn't shot. He was beat to death, brutally beat. And the saddest part about it, nothing was done. And we came up here last year before Freddie Gray. I told y'all we was in a state of emergency, and we were disrespected, to be honest. They told us to take that carnage back to Baltimore. This is not just a Baltimore issue. This is a worldwide issue. But right now I'm here because change is definitely and totally needed. When is enough enough? Like, how many more bodies? And at the end of the day, we're talking about men and women of blue who hold people accountable. Who is holding them accountable? That's what I wanted to know. And with my brother being brutally beat to death, we've been protesting for 135 weeks. As of tomorrow. This is ridiculous. Nobody family, and I'm up here with all the mothers, nobody family deserves this. Because at the end of the day, when y'all go back home to y'all loved ones, we will never see ours again. Only in memory. And that's all we asking for, accountability. I've been told y'all that officers' Bill of Rights with the 10-day period is ridiculous. Because at the end of the day, they questioned all the witnesses who brutally murdered my brother, and nobody never wavered. They kept saying this man was beat to death. Pepper spray tased with a 300-pound man standing on his back while he was pleading and crying for his life. And now I'm pleading and crying for all the victims of police brutality life. It's not a game. Please, at what point are y'all going to take us serious? That's all we asking for and begging for is accountability. That's it. And for the simple fact, and I'm going to close on this, this first two killers, Nicholas David Chapman and Ruiz, they almost killed a man in the same neighborhood. Nothing was done. Abdul Salam was killed. Think about those 10 days that passed. That those officers should have been held accountable. They was let free to come kill one unarmed man, Tyrone West. I am Tyrone West. Thank you.
Chair. Karen Kruger, General Counsel to the Maryland Chiefs of Police, Maryland Sheriff's Association. Stepping in for Chief Scott is Chief Dave Morris to my left. As we spoke earlier on House Bill 1016, the whistleblower protections provided in House Bill 22 are extreme in their reach. I've never before seen a statute that so heavily favors a plaintiff's case. And in addition to that extremity is the fact that this law is not even needed, because there are protections already in existence for all state employees, all county employees, all municipal employees, not just police officers, who, as we mentioned earlier, have a duty to report the misconduct of others. And other government employees, frankly, have that duty as well. There are laws in place specific to police officers under the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. Employees also may file federal lawsuits for protection of their federal constitutional rights. And there is a state whistleblower statute that is quite specific but much more evenly balanced than this proposal is. I mentioned earlier there's no time limit on when such a suit could be filed theoretically against a law enforcement agency. The burdens of proof are spelled out in the statute in a way that's really quite unusual in the litigation context. And essentially then, the law enforcement agency is put in a position where it has to prove the officer's misconduct 2 times, once in defense of the whistleblower claim, and then in the substantive hearing under the LEOBR to prove the underlying misconduct. It will invite extensive litigation, it will invite fraudulent claims, it will diminish accountability and the chief's or sheriff's ability to discipline officers. We've heard from a federal agent and a Massachusetts police officer. Again, we haven't heard from any Maryland officers that they have been subjected to some kind of retaliation. So we ask you for an unfavorable report on this bill. Chief?
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Chief David Morris of the Riverdale Park Police Department here representing Maryland Chiefs and Sheriffs. You've heard my earlier testimony. I want to speak to specifically to the testimony of the gentleman from Massachusetts, because I don't know what happens in Massachusetts, but I can speak specifically to an incident that occurred in Prince George's County, Maryland. And I'm not speaking out of school here because I spoke directly with the individuals involved less than 5 minutes ago. In 1990, police officer Dan Dussault of the Prince George's County Police Department was involved in an incident involving the use of force, etc. That complaint went to Internal Affairs. Officer Dussault told the truth. He did what he was supposed to do. It was not easy, and it created a lot of a flurry of activity. But the idea that nobody ever gets promoted or elevated, as the gentleman from Massachusetts suggested, to a higher rank because they whistleblow, that is completely false, at least in this one particular case, because Officer Dan Dussault rose to the rank of police major. It was a meteoric rise because he was promoted to major within 14 years, the fastest individual promoted to the rank of major in the Prince George's County Police Department, went on to have a stellar career, retired as a highly respected major with the Prince George's County Police Department, is now currently serving as a chief in Northern Virginia. So the idea that whistleblower protections are needed, the fact of the matter is that the policies and procedures of police departments require officers to report unreported type of misconduct, that they have an obligation and they have a duty. It already exists. This all is not necessary. For that, we would request an unfavorable report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, officer. Just one quick question. Was the officer that you're talking about was in Prince George's County? Is he African American?
And the gentleman came
No, sir, he's not.
Really
He's
kind
white.
of for the bill, but against some parts of it. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Melvin High, and I'm the Sheriff for Prince George's County. And I'm here today to speak in regard to law enforcement transparency and accountability. It is the view of the Chiefs and Sheriffs of Maryland that in affording law enforcement due process, the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights attempted to balance the accountability factor by allowing the Chiefs and Sheriffs, with some notable exceptions, to structure the hearing process and hold final authority to impose discipline. That was a finding In a June 1999 study conducted by the Institute for Governmental Service at the University of Maryland Center for Applied Policy Studies, entitled Review of Police Disciplinary Procedures in Maryland and Other States. In the current 2016 legislative session, the chiefs and sheriffs and others have recognized that the accountability factor could be enhanced. Our internal review and recommendations were shared with the work group members and with many others. Our General Assembly, along with other groups, with the chiefs and sheriffs, have worked over the last year to bring about such reform. While we agree with some of the provisions developed by the work group, the resulting House Bill 1016 does not achieve the strengthening of police accountability the public sought and that we feel necessary, but in fact weakens it. Our concern is that language in the proposed bill addressing police reform introduces a complete overhaul of the existing system for convening an administrative hearing board for adjudicating allegations of misconduct. Of great concern to the chiefs and sheriffs are the provisions removing the authority of the chief or sheriff to appoint each of the 3 members of the administrative hearing board. In one provision, the proposed hearing board structure in the bill reduces the chief's and sheriff's ability to appoint experienced, knowledgeable professionals to hear these critical disciplinary matters and sets up a compromise structure which, in our view, will stalemate the process so that hearings may not be held at all. A hearing board should be fair and impartial and not systematically favor either the agency or the officer who is charged with misconduct. It is particularly troublesome that in the most serious type of potential misconduct, allegations of police brutality, the hearing board process outlined in the bill eliminates the ability of the agency executive to hold the members accountable for excessive force. In particular, the ability of the charged member to select one of the 3 members of the hearing board without restriction, and then to have the ability to pick the 3rd member, which must be agreed upon between the member and the agency executive, is tantamount to neutering the hearing process. Further, if the officer does not agree to the 3rd member, the board cannot go forward and accountability is frustrated. Furthermore, and importantly, it ends the chiefs and sheriff's authority to impose final discipline necessary to hold members accountable. We believe this divided responsibility does not facilitate fair, reasonable, and just outcomes. The nature of the work and the risk and the willingness to make life-giving sacrifices demand that we afford officers and deputies reasonable due process when we investigate them for allegations of misconduct. However, this hybrid board takes authority away from the person who has the responsibility with a structure that weakens and undermines the process and invites stalemate. The public everywhere believes the buck stops with the chief or sheriff. This legislation ends that. I believe very strongly in public accountability and transparency for law enforcement actions, and on behalf of the chiefs and sheriffs, I believe, however, that the public's interest in police accountability and transparency can be best achieved strengthening the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights in the way we have recommended in a number of proposed amendments that we have submitted.
All right, Mr. Chairman, First Sergeant Jimmy DeLay. I'm with the Maryland State Police. I'm also the president of the State Law Enforcement Officers Labor Alliance, representing approximately 1,800 officers, including the State Police and 9 other departments. We're here in opposition to this particular bill. We've submitted written testimony on the issue. Many of the points have already been brought up in the previous FOP panel. I'm not going to bore you with that. Also, many points have been brought up by some of the questions made by the delegates. Just a few things that we're against. Once we're against the extending it to 366 days. As of just like the FOP panel, we believe 180 is more reasonable to allow the officer involved to recall, locate witnesses, and everything dealing with that. The other thing that's already been brought up, many questions, is we also feel strongly that civilians should not be sitting on trial boards simply because you have training in LEOBR does not equip someone with the necessary skills to adjudicate a police misconduct case that is only going to be garnered with the experience of being a law enforcement officer. That's really the only issues I want to bring on this one.
On behalf of the State Law Enforcement Officers Labor Alliance, my name is Sean Malone. We submitted pretty detailed testimony referencing the page and lines of areas of the bill that we had concerns with, areas of the bill that we thought could be tightened up. I'm not going to run through them there in your packets. If there's any questions on that, we're happy to answer.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. My name is Hector Velez. I'm Assistant Chief of Police with the Prince George's County Police Department. In the interest of time, I'd like to make a brief statement on behalf of Henry Stawinski, the Chief of the Prince George's County Police Department, which is that he supports the Maryland Chiefs Association, the Maryland Sheriff's Association in this effort, and he concurs that the final authority and determination of the Administrative Hearing Board composition must remain within the purview and responsibility of the Chief or the Sheriff. At this point, I'd like to turn my time over to Chief Fitzgerald.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. And I want to just respect the fact that there was a lot of work done over the summer by the commission that Delegate Anderson chaired. We want to respect that, and we appreciate the fact that there's a lot of good work done. We really want to support this bill, but to do so, we would ask for some significant changes in a couple of areas. Briefly, my background: my name is John Fitzgerald. I've been doing this work for 32 years. 25 of those years with the Montgomery County Police Department as a command officer. Currently the Chief of Police at Chevy Chase Village, a small municipality in Montgomery County. Been an attorney in Maryland for 25 years, and today I'm speaking on behalf of the Maryland Chiefs and Maryland Sheriffs Associations. The topic today, Speaker Bush said that the principal purpose of this bill is to improve the relationship between the communities and the police. We absolutely support that. Completely. And it's all about trust. We need to strengthen that. We know where we are in this world. We are looking to make things better. This bill has a couple of good things in it, but this bill has missed some really good opportunities to really make a difference. I'll give you 3 specific changes that I would ask you to consider making. And they are consistent, some of them, these 3, with what we've submitted. If you want to make meaningful change, you do this. First of all, I would recommend strongly that we delete this brutality board. The brutality board is indeed a stacked deck that would obfuscate justice. We would get less accountability with the brutality board. Put a big red line through that, please. Number 2, what we need to do is restore final authority in the chiefs and sheriffs who are accountable to the people they serve, either directly through the voters or indirectly through the mayors and county executives. And here's how we do that. There is a current provision in the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. And setting the context, let me just mention this. Fewer than 20 states in these United States have laws that provide procedural protections for police in an employment context. None of these laws has greater protections for police officers than the one in this state since 1974. There is plenty of process here, and arguably more than that is due in some circumstances, but we won't argue that. What we need to do is 2 more things. This bill does not touch on the fact that final authority for discipline may rest with an alternative hearing board, and we can get rid of that by simply deleting 3-108C3. That provision, 3-108C3, says that the alternative board's final authority is subject to binding arbitration. An arbitrator gets to say the chief and sheriff no longer gets to discipline, but they get the employee back if they decide to ignore the false statement or the excessive force. The third thing we need to do is get rid of 3-107, sub 4, Roman 7. 3-107, 4, Roman 7. That provision also makes the creation of a separate alternative board subject to binding arbitration. Again, an arbitrator from Philadelphia or Cincinnati comes in and decides how the discipline is going to work against the wishes of the county executive or the mayor. So we need to eliminate binding arbitration for the construction of the boards, for the final authority of the chief executive. And please do not create another board that also stacks the deck. That's the brutality board that's in this bill. I'll take questions if there are any.
Delegate Cluster.
Chairman, who negotiates with the police for their rights in your contract? You're talking about taking away authority from a negotiated contract.
Negative. No, sir. Thank you, Delegate Cluster. Great. No. What I'm suggesting to you is that if we don't propose removing the negotiated opportunity for these alternatives, if both parties negotiate in good faith and they agree upon that, let it happen. What we're saying is we eliminate the binding arbitration, the fiat from some arbitrator who then decides, even though there's no agreement, this is the way it's going to go, and then that person goes back to their city. It's the binding arbitration, Delegate Cluster, that is offensive to the elected to Marylanders.
Montgomery County, who gave the law enforcement? Do you have binding arbitration in Montgomery County?
Yes, there is binding arbitration.
Who gave them that authority? Who gave them the binding arbitration?
The binding arbitration for many things are given by county code.
The county council.
Correct.
Right? Okay. So the county council gave them that. So your argument is with us. You need to go back and argue with the county council.
I beg to differ, sir.
Baltimore County is the same way. There's only 2 agencies in the state that have binding arbitration. Montgomery County and Baltimore County. They're the only 2 that have final authority in the state. And as far as I know, it's working. You have final authority in your police department.
Yes.
The sheriff has final authority. Sure. Every agency in the state, except for 2, have final authority. And it was given to them by the county council, not by the legislature.
Many, many years ago, in the spirit of very solid labor relations, there was binding arbitration as a result of the labor environment in these counties that predated by many years, Delegate Cluster, the change in the LEOBR that mandated that particular provision is subject to binding arbitration. There's a lot. Binding arbitration has its goods. I'm not suggesting get rid of binding arbitration in the labor context. I'm saying this law mandates that subject get in the room. There's no reason why the state law that you have authority over, Delegate Cluster, is forced into that labor setting. Binding arbitration is fine for wages, hours, and working conditions. And that was there for about 25 years before this law was amended to mandate that topic be in the room.
And basically, I disagree. I think you're asking us to take away home rule. Home rule, they make the decisions at the county levels, how they want to negotiate, what they want to give them in their contracts, and you're asking us as a state to 22 of us that out of the 22, maybe 5 of us represent or 3 of us represent those counties that you're talking about. You're asking the rest of the agency and everybody down here, the rest of the committee, to take away authority that the county rule and the county council gave them.
The county council did not mandate that the 2 topics, the creation of an alternative hearing board and the final authority being removed from the chief executive law enforcement officer, be a topic in the arbitration. The final authority and the construction of the board were never a part of that conversation. Home rule did this, Delegate Cluster, and I think we really agree. Home rule did this. They created the labor environment, and they are negotiating wages, hours, and working conditions. The legislature in Maryland, at some point about a dozen years ago, decided to insert a sentence that was never in the LEOBR. It is that change that forced these topics into the binding arbitration setting. And prior to that, even without this law, if Baltimore County and Montgomery County chose to make these topics part of their local binding arbitration, they're free to do that. It was the state that mandated it. That is why we're talking about it in this room, Delegate Cluster. That is why you have the authority to change it, and you are obfuscating the topic by putting it back on home rule. That's a misdirection.
They can take it away at any time when they go to the next negotiating table.
They cannot. The state law requires that it be part of binding arbitration, and even though the employer may oppose it, Delegate Cluster, the union can bring it in the room and say, guess what, arbitrator, you choose, here's our offer. And the county or the city can say, we want none of it, and guess what? When that arbitrator picks it, it's a done deal because the law says it. That's how it works.
The place where you'll be able to hear me. Yeah, just slide down. My name is Karen Kruger. I've been a police legal advisor in Maryland for over 20 years. I'm the general counsel to the Maryland Chiefs of Police Association and the Maryland Sheriff's Association. I know that you've been provided with some written testimony from our legislative committee. It's quite detailed. I've spent a lot of time looking at this bill, and as you can see from the written testimony, there are some serious concerns about some of the proposals, particularly invading the province of the chiefs and sheriffs to run their agencies. A lot of mandates, a lot of reporting requirements, no particular funding. Many of the other issues have been addressed, but I want to speak specifically to the whistleblower section. And my comments and those of my chief colleagues on this topic would also apply to House Bill 221, which I think you're hearing also this afternoon. They're identical bills to this section of 1061. First, you should be reminded that police officers, deputy sheriffs have a duty to come forward and report misconduct. The proponents of the whistleblower piece of this bill, which if you're a lawyer, I think your head is probably spinning reading this bill. It provides an extraordinary level of remedy and, frankly, over-remedy to a plaintiff who now gets to file a lawsuit against his own employer, even on the mere speculation that there's been some form of retaliation. But I'll come back to that in just a minute. And the proponents come and give you this story that police officers are afraid to come forward, and yet we don't have one single specific example of that having occurred. There are already protections for these officers. There's a protection in the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. We cited that in our paper. There's protections under federal law. There are whistleblower protections under state law. And most counties and municipalities also have whistleblower protections for their employees. So what this new provision, this new and expanded, widely expanded provision provides is an artificial safe haven for officers who are actually under investigation for misconduct themselves. And it invites, frankly, fraudulent claims of whistleblower because it would put a stop, essentially, to any disciplinary process, not only against that officer, but perhaps other officers that are involved. So if you're looking for accountability, it's going to be stymied by this whistleblower provision. It will lead to extensive litigation that will be costly. There's no time limitation, so an officer could come back 20 years later and say, oh, remember when I wasn't promoted in 1998? Oh, that was in retaliation, and now I'm due all these damages and attorney's fees. So it's quite an overwhelming provision. It's not needed. Officers already have a duty to come forward. They already have protections under state, local, and federal law, and we urge an unfavorable report. I would add to Chief Fitzgerald's list of things to be drawn through with the red pen to include this whistleblower section. I'm going to invite Chief Scott to give us some more specific examples.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chairman. As I testified last year on the whistleblower bill that this committee heard, one of the concerns of the chiefs is, and is part of the reason why we oppose 1016, is that under the whistleblower protection, should you have a group of police officers engaged in a criminal enterprise where 3 of them are committing a series of crimes or involved in doing whatever illegal activity they may be engaged in. One of them takes their profits from this illegal enterprise and then decides to whistleblow or report as other co-conspirators to the police chief or the internal affairs investigators. Then that person, that officer, is shielded from any kind of disciplinary action a department may take in reference to his participation in this enterprise. And that's a very serious issue because we don't want our officers, we talk about transparency, we talk about accountability. We don't want officers using a provision of the law to shield themselves from responsibility for improper or illegal conduct. So that's our position on whistleblower. And as I sit here, I also represent the Police Chiefs Association of Prince George's County. I would be remiss in my responsibilities to that organization to oppose the bill also on the composition of the proposed new Maryland Police Commission and Standards Commission, or whatever it's going to be called, is because a couple of years ago we came before this committee and unanimously were granted a position by law on the police and correctional training commissions. And this legislation that you're considering now, 1016, leaves the Police Chiefs Association of Prince George's County off of that board. And we feel that it's absolutely critical that the Chiefs Association of Prince George's County, which represents over 3,000 law enforcement officers in the state, almost a quarter of the number of officers in the state, to be left off that board. Thank you, and I'll take any questions if you have any. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Bernie Shaw representing the Maryland Trooper Association. Today with me is Mrs. Rebecca Smith of Warnken LLC. She's the lead counsel for the Maryland Trooper Association. We've put in a position paper outlining our concerns with House Bill 1016, as well as 11 requested amendments to the bill. At this point, if I could, I'd like to turn it over to Mrs. Smith, and then later on go over the 11 amendments.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your time. My name is Rebecca Smith with Warnken LLC, and I am lead counsel for the Maryland Troopers Association. So my perspective with respect to any changes to LEOBR is with respect to the Maryland State Police, because that's the primary agency that I deal with on a day-to-day basis. And it's important for the committee to understand that the LEOBR only protects troopers in an administrative context. I think it was already previously brought up before that if a trooper or a law enforcement officer is charged criminally with assault or something worse, they are now under the constitutional protections that regular citizens have. And a criminal case is usually completed prior to LEOBR being triggered in those situations. So if a law enforcement officer is found guilty of a felony, for example, there is no hearing board process for those law enforcement officers. And I think that that's important to keep in mind as we're looking at why this legislation has come forward and why it's come forward at this time. LEOBR is in place to protect law enforcement officers from arbitrary firing and punishment. And as someone who handles these types of cases on a day-to-day basis, I do see situations where complaints are made against law enforcement officers that are completely false. I have had situations where things are taken to a hearing board. I have had excessive force hearing boards. And I think if Delegate Anderson was here, he actually sat in on one of my hearing boards with the Maryland State Police. I did object to his presence and being there because I do not believe that hearing boards should be open. But the process does work. These law enforcement officers, with the right direction from the head of the police agency, we don't need these changes to LEOBR. We need different leadership maybe, or maybe different policy within different agencies. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Shaw.
I have 11 amendments. The first one deals with the video. On page 5, line 15, it says that there can be a video. Well, we felt that just saying there could be a video would not work very well, and the person taking the video should be present at the incident, at the alleged incident, so they may attest to the video recording as a complete and accurate representation of the alleged incident. That way, we're covered there. We know we got everything. we asked for an amendment on page 5, line 18, 366 to 120. We're willing to go in with the FOP at 180 if that so works. On page 5, line 28 and 29, after 5 and before days, insert business. So it would be 5 business days instead of 5 regular days. On page 6, strike or on line 25 through rights on line 28 in its entirety. Also dealing with the open meeting, we feel that after public, if you put providing an individual obtains permission to obtain from the hearing board chair, so if they obtain, that way we don't have 50 people coming in, want it, and then the attendance by the public would not adversely impact a law enforcement covert operation or the identity of an undercover law enforcement officer. If we have an undercover officer that's testifying, we don't want the public in there with him, because then he's of no value to the law, to it. Dealing with, on page 15, line 24, after state, you put without relationships to law enforcement. The makeup of the committee now seems to be more civilian than law enforcement, or the commission, rather, and we felt that it should be the option of the governor when he appoints the 2 citizens. It could be a retired law enforcement officer or whatever that would be helpful to it. On page 20, lines 7 and 8, delete in their entirety and insert the periodic physical evaluation of a law enforcement officer as requested by a law enforcement agency. It doesn't require it, but if the department deems that it's necessary to have someone take a psychological evaluation, they can request it. On page 20, line 25, dealing with the confidential telephone call to the peer